Whether that'll work or not, I don't know. All right, real quickly, I got a couple of things I want to do. Gene, you're at the Sydney Rotary Club at their monthly meeting, and the guest speaker is Tom Osborne, but he calls ahead and says he can't be there. He's a little late. So the president of the Rotary Club turns to you and says, "What's going on at the middle school in Sydney?" What are you going to tell him?
Well, I guess,
Good things about the middle school.
well, hopefully the truth, that first and foremost. But, do you want me to like talk at like what's going on in our middle school right now, or?
If somebody asks you what are some new things or exciting things that are going on in your school, what would you tell them?
Well, the first thing, I mean, I'm not at the middle school, but I know all about our district. So the
Well,
first thing,
you're at the what?
I'm at fifth and sixth grade, so it's kind of like an intermediate.
Okay.
But I can talk about any of them. So yeah, absolutely. So at the middle school, they have a really, really neat thing. They kind of go by a mantra called the Esprit de Corps. And essentially what that is just like sound mind, sound body. And they got their whole staff really kind of rallied around that saying. And so what they do is they have Esprit de Corps days where they talk to the students on student development, and they go through what it means to actually have a sound mind, as a student, and a sound body. And they go through lots, I think it's 4 or 5 spirit weeks a year, where each spirit week is dedicated to either the mind or the body of being a powerful learner. I think too many times that in kind of back 15, 20 years ago, schools were all about compliance, right? You ask students, what does it mean to be a great learner? They would say, well, I'd sit down and I listen. I don't talk when the teacher's talking. I do my homework on time. They would say that's what it means to be a good learner. Well, we're kind of flipping that as a district and a school, and we're teaching kids what it means to be a powerful learner, like having grit and being a risk taker and taking ownership of their own learning. And so it's really kind of neat to see kind of the boot camp style come through to teach students. And I bet if any school asked their kids, what does it mean to be a great learner, they'd all say what our kids said when we surveyed them, and said, well, I basically need to shut up so I don't get in trouble. So that's what they thought it meant. So we're kind of flipping the mode on what it means to be a powerful learner with the kids, so they can all of our kids in our district should be able to verbalize now, to have grit, be a risk taker, and take ownership of yourself and your learning.
Good. Jeremy, Osborne is late for your meeting too. What can you tell me about your school that's exciting?
I'd probably start with some of the facility stuff that we have going on, because we just got the track resurfaced, and that's going to be painted in the next probably in the next couple of weeks if they get in. We're doing new ceiling tiles in all the common areas throughout the course of the building, and then overall we're just getting everything ready to go for next year. We're just entering into year 2 of a new math curriculum, K-12, which has been a good thing, and we got through the growing pains. We should now start to see some of the growth out of that, and I think that's going to be a big positive as well.
Well, the lesson that I have is, in your hip pocket, you ought to be able to come up with 6 exciting things about your school district or your building, because those things come up when they happen, or somebody just asks you. So think about, some things that you would want to bring up about your school, and to communicate with your community or people in your community. All right, Brett, you and several other teachers are aware that an elementary teacher may be sexually abusing a student, and the principal has not reported. Should you report it? And should you report the principal for intentional negligence? What do you think?
Well, I think, yes, it should be reported. You're obligated to report it if you know that it's taking place. But at the same time, I think I would talk to that principal and understand why they haven't reported it at this point. Get the details surrounding the events, and not just make jump to judgments, I guess. Just like any actions that a student may be taking, you want to do an investigation and make sure things are as they seem. And then once you have your investigation made, then maybe you do have to take it to the commission and report to your principal.
Who would you report it to? If it's a student and you're the teacher, you're a teacher, you're not the one that's sexually abusing.
Oh, if you're just a teacher, well, I would report it to an administrator and probably to our counselor as well, and then also call the state and report it as well. Because
that's the right answer. There's an 800 number, and
Yeah.
and I'm doing that for the undergraduate students, and it is your responsibility to report it.
yes,
I think most schools would like to have you discuss it with principal and then report it. Or it says report or see this reported, and there is a case where teacher talked to the principal and the principal didn't report it, so nobody reported it. So you want to make sure you follow up on it. Good. Allison, I'm a first-year social studies basketball coach with excellent teaching experience. You offered me the job as a Gothenburg middle school social studies teacher and head basketball coach. I mentioned that I've been offered a middle school teaching job in Lincoln and some coaching. Why should I come to Gothenburg?
Did you say another coach asked that?
You just offered me the job, but I tell you, I've been offered a job in Lincoln in a middle school, but no head coaching. But why would I come to Gothenburg instead of Lincoln?
I think in Gothenburg you're going to experience a whole different environment. We really work hard to have a family environment where our teachers really operate as a family, and we call it that. We're a small community, and so you're going to really have an opportunity to be involved and just really work together. I guess the coaching piece of it, I think our coaches would tell you that they have an opportunity to really collaborate. We have about high 70% of our kids are involved in an activity of some sort. And those coaches work together quite a lot to make practices work. It's not uncommon to have kiddos that are going from, say, one act practice in the morning at 6 into, potentially basketball practice before school starts, and then following up if it's the right time of year with the musical. And so we just have kids that are really involved in lots of different aspects. I don't think you get that in a big community. I think kiddos tend to really, pigeonhole into a specific activity.
Tell me about housing in Gothenburg. I have a wife.
Well, it used to be really tough. It did. It used to be really tough, but it's gotten better. One of the first things that I do when we hire new teachers, we send out a welcome packet, and in there it has all the realtors. It also has all the people that our staff has recommended as contact people that might have rentals, that sort of thing. So I would say about 4 years ago, that was really difficult for our teachers to find housing, but it has gotten much easier. We have honestly, it has not been a complaint in the last 3 years.
Okay. Who's your athletic director?
Well, we're just transitioning. Mark Maracek will be taking the reins as our activities director starting, supposedly August 1st, but he's been in and out quite a bit already.
Who's the athletic director at COSAD, the new one?
Jeremy Yilk.
Jeremy Yilk. He called
Yeah.
me and offered me a job too, but he said that it would only be assistant coach. So I'm
Oh, man.
No,
Gosh. Well, I was laughing as you're describing that because we've hired 12 new teachers, and the scenario you gave was spot on to one that we did fill.
One of the things that I would suggest when you're out of ways and somebody from Lincoln or Wisner or wherever is we used to have somebody show the people around the town, and sometimes it was a realtor, and there were only 2 or 3 really good realtors, but they want to know because they don't want to travel back out there if they're not going to have an idea what that is. Okay, yeah. Take out a piece of paper. If you have a piece of paper and a pencil, this is going to be 5 minutes, we'll say, 5 to 10. Together, you are the administrative team. And you're at Matt Dopp Public School. Fairly good sized district in central Nebraska. Anyway, here's what you have been asked to do. The board has a policy that they just wrote because they realized they didn't have it. The policy is the Matt Dopp Public Schools encourages the use of school facilities with or without fees. What would the administrative policy procedures be? What would you want to write into the, now it's the board, they wanted a real broad policy, which it is, a board policy should be broad. Now you've got to write the procedure. How are you going to let the building be used? What rules will you have? What procedures will you follow? Just talk out loud because we're all in the same administrative team building.
So we've just officially opened the door to all groups at this point, correct?
Well, the board just, that's what they gave you. They gave you, we want the facilities used by the community.
Well, we recently opened up a weight room, and with our same weight room as we use in the high school, we want lots of community involvement. And we contacted the lawyers right away and see what other schools are doing for a permission slip or whatever. And then I would recommend to the board that we want to put a $20 deposit. I know we want to say free, but if you put just $20 on it, that's going to prevent a lot of, we're not making it too expensive to get people out of the building, but you put that $20 and it's just not, you're giving a card to every Joe that wants to come into your school.
Okay, so that'd be a part of the procedure or policy. What about the use of the auditorium where the band usually plays? If somebody wants to use the auditorium, what kinds of situations would you have?
Sorry, go ahead, whoever that was.
That it was just me. I think I would make sure that they had a member of the custodial staff available to make sure that everything was maintained appropriately, and then they would have to pay for the custodian fees to be there. And I think depending on the size of the activity, I guess you could set parameters. Probably an administrator needs to be in the building.
What about if they use it during the day and you have to make sure that the school isn't using it at that time as well?
Right.
One of the things that we've ran into, we had somebody come in and use our auditorium and they blew the sound system. And so a requirement now is that they have to pay one of our staff people to be in there and run the sound system if they're going to use our equipment. That was an expensive fix.
Anytime I would say like the things that came up right away in my head just for this in general, I guess, would have been like liability insurance. If whoever's coming in, they probably would need to have some sort of liability if they get hurt on school grounds. Like the Title IX, just scheduling, like is it heavily more boys or girls, and worrying about who can use it and who can't. And then who obviously is the center scheduler, so you don't have multiple people showing up and fighting for the same space. And then who has keys and who gets keys and how frequently they can come in and out of the building. If it's a school, obviously, like if it's a key fob system, they'll have times. But if not, it's just like a lock key. Who gets keys and who can come in and out as they please.
So
Just
we offer different fees for different rooms or different activities or size of the.
Could you read the policy one more time? Did it mention anything in there about fees, about what they had accepted?
It said with or without fees. Which
Okay, so yeah, I do think that's important because there's going to be, you might have a different setup for, say, a town team league that's going to use the gym every Tuesday night for half of the year, as opposed to somebody who might be coming in and want to use your facilities for 2 days because they're having a reunion or something like that. So you got to have a usage fees policy, and then which administrator would oversee that, because it's always best to have those people come to one person when they're getting permission to use those kind of things.
What else would you want in there? anybody can use it or just community people?
What I would do, I mean, I guess I deal with a lot of this stuff in Shelton, and the things I jotted down were define areas of access and time parameters, and that would obviously go in your form. Expectations of use, cleanliness, upkeep. I do think there should be a proof of residence thing because it is something that's funded by local taxpayers. And I know some people think that's a little intrusive, but we have an awful lot of people that have access that probably shouldn't, that don't live here, that are people's cousins. We always joke that if you don't have a key to the Shelton weight room in Buffalo County, you're one of the 5. And then I honestly think it should be a year by year thing too, where we put a year time frame on it, because if they really want to use it and it is free, then they'll just give you a call and say, hey, I noticed my card's not working or my thing's up. Could you reactivate me for a year? I've been using it. Because otherwise you get so many cards out there.
One of the things that you would have to determine, you have people in your community that play town team basketball, we'll say. So if they want to host a tournament of other towns, would you allow that, or would you have a fee for that? How would you handle that?
We allow that kind of stuff, and I'm usually the one that they talk to as far as that stuff goes. We have separate keys set up for youth coaches, so we have a bunch of lanyards with keys hanging on the wall. We'll just check them out. I'll write their name on a Post-it note and I'll stick it right on that hook. So I know who has it and I know who to get it back from at the end of the year. And those have similar time parameters, but it's a little bit more loose, and some of the doors are a little different that they can get into with those groups. But those tournaments, I mean, youth wrestling and youth basketball and youth volleyball, those don't happen all the time. So it's really not that big of an inconvenience or anything like that.
You know, you can require, if there's over so many people, you can require event insurance. And we used to have this huge carnival that was, it was like PTA or something like that. But that was, they got event insurance, and they could get it fairly inexpensive for a year. So one year they'd have it on April 2nd. The next year they'd have it on April 1st. So they could get two events in there. But I remember having gymnastics classes that we required some insurance on that. But if something goes wrong with the building, your liability insurance will have to cover it, not those people. But if they're doing inappropriate coaching or something, or they're doing things that's beyond. What about open or closed forum? Would that be in that policy? What's the difference?
I don't think you would have to necessarily address the open or closed forum issue there if you have it someplace else determined. I was actually going to ask this question: what if your school has been used as a public facility for a funeral in the past? Does that create an open forum situation?
Yeah, unless you wrote a policy that said it couldn't be used for those types of things. But like I think Allison said, they used the school. You know, I mean, it's not encouraged, but there are some communities that the school's only got enough room to, are the only ones that have enough room to host something like that. So probably with approval of the superintendent or something, you wouldn't go to the board with that. But you got to remember, if you're allowing external groups to bring one church group in, that becomes an open forum. Modified forum is when you say only your students will be involved. But an open forum, and then anybody in the community can bring whoever they want, and it can get a little touchy. I remember a few years ago this was my first school, we had a church group that wanted to have their state convention in our gymnasium. And I suggested to the board, we really haven't done anything like this, and it sounds good, it's a church group, but what if it's a devil's advocate or a gay group, or if you allow one with an open forum, you about have to allow them all. So that's that. We get that, I guess, with school law some. So but those are some things that you'd want to think about is that with your policies, if you're going to allow all groups, the one that is, to me, is a kicker is your Fellowship of Christian Athletes. When that's held and how it's held, then another religious group could come in and say, well, we want to meet with the students about our religion, which I think that's carrying a little further than it would go in your community, I think. But
can you specify what kinds of groups can come and what can't, though?
What's that?
Can you put a religious, like, say, no religious activities are allowed, whereas you'll allow other things, or as soon as you open the door, it's completely open to all different types of groups?
Well, see, that was the West Side case, where they had said students could have different kinds of, the science club could meet, and then the West Side board said, but this religious group, all it was students who wanted to have their own religious group couldn't meet. And, the court ruled, well, it's a school activity, it's a school group, so it's open. And so, yeah, you have to be aware of what those things can lead to. And I think those of you that have the law class, we've talked about that. I think the board overreacted. There was a real issue about religion in schools, and what that case showed was that you can have religion in schools, but it can't be led by the school or by teachers. So anyway, okay, yeah, you guys did a good job on those. Topic 13, speak their language or working with boards, and I gave that for a convention. Joel, you sat in on a convention. May have wasted the 45 minutes with a board member, and afterwards he says, what'd you think? What'd you get out of that? What would you tell him?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just when you work with your board, just the idea of understanding one another, and just, I think you have to be open and honest about some things, but at the same time, feeling each other out is kind of a key part of that as well. But it's one of those things, it takes time to do that. And I guess what he might get from it, what I might get from it, really kind of depends on that. We're talking about common language piece. They may have picked up on some things where, I was already aware of, but it's important we still talk about that and we, talk about our definitions.
Dave, what would be the one thing you got out of that?
Well, and I think as a young administrator, a lot of that is how there's kind of a constant or a negotiation between board members and administration about what's my responsibility and role and what's your responsibility and role. And as an administrator, I think one of the first things is to educate your board members a little bit along the way. And you say use the same language, but I think maybe not to intimidate them so much with all the acronyms and things, but rather this is why this is your job. This is why you don't want to get involved, because later you're going to be setting in on a hearing and you don't want to have to set out because you're already, a voice in this kind of thing. Because I don't know that board members that, spend their day on the farm think about all of those consequences of different actions along the way.
Allison, you said something the same about you were going to change some of your ways by not using those acronyms so much.
Yeah, it just caught me off guard. I can't remember the example that was given, but it was a very simple example, and it really kind of threw me off thinking, how many times have we thrown out dibbles or map or whatever, when instead you could just say, the assessment we use to tell us where kids are at. And so, yeah, it was a big eye-opener for me and we have a fabulous board, and I would bet they could probably give you some basics, but why not speak their language?
At the end of our specialist program, you will do an oral interview with the board. Basically, it's a board interview. And that's one of the things we try to remind people afterwards is, don't use those acronyms. If it's ESU, so I work a lot with ESU, which is our area support unit. At least so they have some, a good board will know most of those terms, but when you're interviewing, you don't want them confused either. Anything else on that? I had met a young superintendent who finished our program, and Jackie had to go to a baptism, but we had just left the seminar, and I ran into this fellow, and we started talking, and I didn't bring it up. He says, you know, the one thing I remember that you said, and he said, treat every new board member as a positive challenge. He says, I really try to do that. That's not the one I would have picked out of there, but he did it. He thought that was the one that he came out of there with. 14 was Mitch, first year superintendent. That's about 4 years old now. I probably should be. Maybe one of you guys will be a first year superintendent I can tape, but what did Mitch have to tell us? Anybody?
I really liked his strategic process on how he developed the budget. This being the first class I've taken, that's probably, I think, my greatest opportunity for growth is there with the budget. And so I just really appreciated his systematic process where, he started early and worked through those specific pieces, honestly, in a week-by-week fashion until he had that sucker ready to roll. So that was good stuff.
Yeah, he is pretty organized. Anything else? What else did any pick up?
I like the idea of making sure that you have enough money or funds set aside for the lean times, like the situation in North Platte where you may not get money in a timely manner. You can still pay bills, personnel, and all of that stuff and not have to worry.
How many of you had the finance class? You did. And we did the video, where Dennis Poole explains the cash reserve issues, and I think Brian Moshman did too in his. But yeah, cash reserve's pretty important, and it's something you kind of want to check when you're taking a superintendent's position. Is what was cash reserve in August of this year, and what was it in August of last year? If it's significantly less, then you need to realize that there may be some reasons of overspending or lack of resources. But cash reserve is, some people think it's just money that's set aside, but it's set aside for the months that you don't get good tax draws, and so you don't have to borrow money. So,
Dr. Nelson, is our superintendent always mentions to our administration staff that the best way to go about the cash reserve is kind of 3 months worth of payroll to be. Is that a standard, or is that a thing that's talked about very commonly, or is that just something that he just says is? That's
what sometimes is taught out there in finance classes, and I think Dennis Poole said 15 to 20%, something like that. I think Omaha has some limits on it. What's the problem of having too much cash reserve?
Probably not being fiscally responsible to your taxpayers.
Yeah, the taxpayers are borrowing money to pay their taxes, and you don't really need it. Then it's not fair to your taxpayers, and you'll get criticized for that if you have too big a cash reserve. But I was always I was a big believer in a good cash reserve. I raised our cash reserve quite a bit over the years. Of course, you do that by spending less than what you ask for, and so. And one of the things when I first started, my first superintendent, the head of the finance department, our superintendent, the fellow I replaced was dying of cancer, so I didn't get to talk to him at all. One time, I think, and so the guy from the department came down, and one of the things he said is, add an extra teacher in there. You have the big figure that says salaries, and his thought, he says, add an extra teacher and a half. Because people won't look at that. They see this big number and they don't look at, well, no, you got 24 teachers there. It's not, it just comes as one solid number. And his point was, in the middle of the year, you get a special ed person that moves into the district, or all of a sudden the board decides they want a gifted program. You've got the money in, and if you don't use it, then you increase your cash reserve a little bit. But you can't do all of it. How about, Cindy's video on selection and training of principals. What'd you get out of that one?
I think it's really cool how they have a program at LPS to grow administrators within their system. And I would imagine they probably reap the benefits of that, but I bet you the neighboring communities probably do as well.
Yeah, it makes it a little more. They'll tell you that they're an open district, as far as people applying, but if you have really good experience outside of the district, you'd be considered. But basically, you're fighting people who have been in this academy that they've gotten to know, and so it's a little more difficult in a district like Lincoln. Although there's a couple of principals that came in from we had guest speakers last week, and one of them came from Conestoga. I think that he eventually took a middle school principal and then became the HR person for the district. So there's openings, but that academy is pretty significant. I was really a little upset when I found out that NCSA hosts that academy and they buy lunch for them. They didn't buy any lunch for us, so I guess we're not Lincoln. Okay, what else did you say about selection and training of principals?
I think one part is, knowing the strengths. I think when you're in a district that size and you have to fill multiple positions, having that idea of, where you could put someone where, and, I think that's kind of a big undertaking in a district that size where, where one small school, you've got that one person and you don't really know if it's a fit or not, because that's the only place to go.
What do you think that superintendents, and you'll be superintendents, what are they looking for in principals?
She said instructional leader over manager was the big thing. And that almost seems like a bit of an evolution in education in general, is just the emphasis on improving the teachers that you have on staff rather than just managing what you have for resources.
Understanding school improvement, a lot of superintendents have gone years where they had the principal do it and they want to hire somebody else who can continue to do it instead of, a good superintendent will be involved in that school improvement process as much as anybody, but often it gets shifted off to somebody else.
I wrote down that quote that she said, "You can't supervise and appraise what you don't know." That actually has caused me, and I'm going to try now to get on our team to go ahead and do those things, because I haven't done that for several years. So I think it's important to keep learning.
Yeah, and it's great to have in your resume too that you've been on a school improvement team, and that's what they're looking for. That's a leadership position, and in some schools it's a volunteer, in other schools it's a position that's delegated, and if it's delegated, that they think you're doing a good job, or you wouldn't be the person that would be getting that assignment. I haven't read any of the entry plans because it's not really due yet. And we'll talk about that if we have some time at the end. But I wanted to talk a little bit about types of decision making. And, you'll be leading some administrative meetings. You'll be principal in some administrative meetings. And just a little bit of kind of what kinds of meetings, and you probably recognize your own. Some of them they call a dictatorial model. And the superintendent, or whoever's leading that meeting, that's how it's going to be, and that's just how it's going to be. And then there's kind of the consultative model, and hope that in that case where the leader of the group opens it up to everybody and tries to get information from all of them. But it still is that person's decision. They want an example I would give is we had a calendar committee, and they would get together and they'd talk about things that they'd want to do. And when I first time I did it, I didn't realize there weren't any parents on the calendar committee. It was all teachers. And so I kind of backed it up and said, well, let's bring in, 3 parents and 3 students and let's see what we get. And so then I don't know if that was well accepted or not, but that's what we did. But at the start, I always said, I'm interested in what you have to say. I'm interested in the things that you, the rationale for some of your thoughts, but I'm the one that has to go to the board and make that decision. And I would use the same kind of approach with some of these principal committees, you know, that there would be teachers and students involved in making those recommendations. But I always kind of made the point there may be something about those people, because I've talked to others that I know about them that you won't know. We can't really make public. But you still got a lot of good information. Another technique then is the democratic technique, where there is no leader. It's just everybody gives their ideas. And one of the weaknesses with that is that often little gets done. You know, nobody's sure what the decision really was. You know, and I had one principal who was very into democratic, and I kind of described not everything got done because people, you know, they would talk about it longer than what it would take to get done. And, you know, another one is, you probably all use that, but brainstorming. But sometimes that gets out of the box. You know, you have to set the parameters of what we're talking about if you're going to brainstorm. And one of the techniques that I really wanted to talk about was the nominal rank technique. Have any of you used that? Are you familiar with that at all? It's kind of a good one to get. I'll just talk about a little bit. There's several steps, and you know, we used it once in faculty, and all faculty where Max McFarland, Dr. McFarland, was a facilitator, and we were trying to decide what things we could cut and what things we weren't willing to give up. And so he kind of led that. I used it, I had a facilitator in, and we did it together. I used it once when we were looking at having a bond issue and what we really wanted to do. But the one that worked, I think it was kind of neat. We were trying to establish board goals for the next year. And we used the nominal rank technique. And the steps are, first of all, you explain the process. Here's what we're going to do. And I'd have the board, and we had a few administrators and some representative teachers. And we talked about, we're going to try to establish what our goals are for next year. But basically, it was direction for the board. And we gave them so much time to consider the main issues. They'd write it down, you know, what were the main issues, and then they'd give them to us. And there were no right or wrong suggestions. And the facilitator would write these considerations up on the board. And then eventually we would get everybody's input, and then we would combine some like-minded issues. You know, maybe somebody had said something about assessment, and somebody else said evaluation, and the facilitator would say, can we combine those two? Are we talking about the same thing? And they'd say yes. And so you would do that, and then you would allow them some time to process it, to look at those items up there. And then often you would allow those who, one of the things that it did was the loudest person didn't dominate the meeting. And most everybody in nominal rank technique feels like they were a part of it. What you do after you get that is you give them, what we used was 5 sticky notes with 5 numbers. 5 was the highest. And then they'd say, okay, put your sticky notes by what you would put as your number one thing. And eventually you could see where they wanted to go with school goals. And one of the things that it does, some of the people wouldn't speak up, it gave them a say and a vote, because we were saying there's no wrong issue to put up, but they also had a vote. And you use the 5 numbers, what sometimes comes out is the highest number, the one that was highest, wasn't anybody's favorite, but everybody saw it as important. And so that became one of our 5 board goals for the year. And it just seemed like it went really well with people feeling like they were involved in it and that they had a say. That doesn't mean the board was going to do that, but the next meeting they almost always adopted the direction they got from that group. And the same thing worked with doing a bond issue. You know, what's our biggest problem? And they would state some different things. One of the things that I learned, and you might learn from this too, from my example maybe, but we were doing this bond issue, and COSAD at that time was a fairly big district, but 10 of the schools were country schools, so they didn't pay. They would pay for a high school bond issue. They wouldn't pay for a middle school or elementary bond issue because they had their own schools. And so we looked at our bond issue, and it was going to be a terrific amount to do the things everybody wanted to do. And so we were having this meeting, trying to decide, do we do a new middle school or we do a new elementary? And for years, my understanding, parents were split on that. And I said something, you know, bond issues that are over 20 cents almost never pass. And we were looking at 43 cents, you know, and so I said, we have to prioritize this. And a fellow sitting in the row, well-respected guy, but not a rocket scientist, he says, well, then why are we here? If you've already determined that we're going to do one building or the other. You know, I thought about that, you know, you're right, you know, how many think we should do both? So yeah, well, let's do both. And I'll be darned if both didn't pass, you know, because they were united in what they wanted to do. So I don't know if I ever spoke up at any other meeting in his life, but he had quite an influence on us. I know that. So anyway, that's one thing one example. Allison, have you ever been involved in your school improvement or your board goals? That any process was used to do that, or I'm asking. I don't expect a
no
answer.
No, not in Gothenburg. I have not.
But you can see where that would be, you know, to
We have been.
focus the vision.
We just did that to set our school improvement goals, actually, where we got together as a whole staff and wrote down all these different ideas, and they got it to a list of 10 that were common themes. And then the board members did the nominal deal, and then I think 8 of us as staff members did the same thing. And then the ones that got the highest score, those are the ones we settled on.
Yeah. And you know, for a lot of school improvements, it's data that directs that. You know, what are your test scores in a certain subject? You know, and sometimes that's unfortunate, because I think things like school climate, school environment are important things to consider. But yeah, that sounds like you had a good process. You know, and a lot of times you don't have to do that. There's a Delphi technique that you can do it on your computer, you know, where people vote and then they come back later and redo it, revote it.
We did it on a computer, actually, we voted online.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, one of the things also that I was going to mention, when you're working with boards, you might want to discuss with them the concept of disagree and consent. And the philosophy behind disagree and consent is that the board may go 4-2. And the consent is that you agree to support it, and there's been good rationale. You should be able to go out even though you voted against it. There should be good rationale that you could explain it, you know, that the board decided this is what was most important or the direction to go. The one thing about that, though, I think you can talk to boards about is consider contrary evidence after it's been voted. You know, you can consider contrary evidence that someday that vote might change, but you can't sabotage the vote. You know, you might think next year, this, you know, remember we voted on this, but There might be contrary evidence that other schools have used this other technique and it's proven successful. So, the main part of that is getting them to understand the vote that passes and that they support that. A few things. One thing I was going to tell you, the course evaluation will be sent out, I think they said the 24th, I'm not sure, but you'll get an email to do the evaluation for this course. I hope that they're interested in scores. I'm really interested in comments, things that you liked or didn't like about the course. And one of the things that I've changed a little bit, because last course, they were very supportive. People were really good. But one of the things is that sometimes our discussion was the same thing we'd just done on discussion board, so it was kind of a repeat. So I've tried to add a few other things that might be important to you as a future superintendent. Some of the things that I put on, there's those course modules and 5 modules, and then underneath that I put a policy review form that we used when a policy was changed or was adopted, and it talks about the date it was first read, when it was approved, had the attorney reviewed it, and then did it get to the teacher's handbook, the middle school handbook. We had a calendar that goes, many of you probably do, that went to the whole community, and we would have some of the board policies in there. Did it get in the calendar? So you might want to take a look at that. The other one, some of you have seen before, I posted a board calendar, and some of that stuff's really old, and that was probably done in 2003 or 4. The important thing, I think, is if you do have a board calendar, put the bold things that are going to be action items, so that somebody gets on the board, they can see when this is going to happen, and then bold or put asterisks when you want a principal to have his report to you, or a committee that's doing language arts, so that they know in February they're going to do a language arts report rather than feeling like they've been called in on it. So, and I posted, I know some of you probably worked on it or maybe are done. I did post just afterwards when you're done. You might want to look. I posted an entry plan by Brett Grell, and it's very well done. And it's something that you might get some ideas from. You don't have to repeat his whole thing, but there's some thoughts. And I posted. We talked about some board superintendent responsibilities, and I posted one that's got board responsibilities and superintendent's responsibilities, and that's from Bismarck, North Dakota. That's their policy. But I thought it was a pretty good explanation. And I posted a thing at the end on working with boards, and basically it was some of the things that we've talked about before. Speak their language, teach them yours. Agenda setting. We had a lot of luck with putting the agenda at the end of the meeting for the next meeting. It kind of helped us ward off some inappropriate board comments. Talked about a board calendar. And one of the things we haven't talked about, but you really want to communicate, other than probably your board president, but you want to communicate with board members as equally as possible. They'll start thinking that 1 or 2 of your board members, because they voted on things you recommended, are your favorites, and you want to work to make that one of your challenges, to work with these other board members. And I talked about principal reports, consent agenda. You all know what that is. Communication with staff. One of the things that we did is we had 5 buildings, and we had the faculty representatives come to meet in my office the Friday before a board meeting. And sometimes, somebody looks at a board agenda and they think it's going to be some big deal, so you kind of let them know what the board's going to be considering ahead of time. I know everybody sends out a board report to the teachers afterwards, but we've had very few teachers that would come to a board meeting unless, I'd say, well, this is going to occur. And the other thing with your board is emphasize confidentiality with boards and boards member spouses. And one of the things that having a treasurer look over the bills before the board meeting rather than going through all the bills. Some board members still like to do that, but anyway, I think that's. How about your entry plans? Have you finished your entry plans, or I said I hadn't looked at them. Where are you at with those? You got yours done, Matt? So what would you share with a board member about when your entry plan?
Just the communication part. I'm going to reach out to them. I'm going to reach out to the previous superintendent. I'm going to reach out to superintendents around the area. When I assume, hopefully, the superintendent's retiring or something, not getting fired, so they're going to work with me and work with them on what they think the budget's going to be. My special district was Ord, so I'd ask them, like, what is the bond? When is it getting paid off? Ask the superintendent specific questions, and like Kubicek said, then work with the NDE to better figure out what the budget is.
Yeah, all of you will face that your first interview if you're not moving into your own district. But your first interview, the doubt that boards sometimes will have in their mind is finance. Do you understand finance? And you want to make sure that you have been mentored by a good superintendent. You've made contacts. You've made contacts with the Department of Education, and you're confident that you can create a workable budget. And I think it really is, if you're in a school district that has a good finance person, spend time with them, even though you're leaving that district. But you have to kind of reassure the board that's interviewing you. And one of the things, even though we were in a very big school district, all of our principals had their own budget. So they were able to say, well, I've worked with an instructional budget. That's a lot different, but a board, at least that's something that hang their hat on. And I had 4 of my principals that became superintendents. So I think that experience probably helped them a little bit. Any other entry plan ideas, or?
I know one thing that'd be valuable if it's possible is after you've been hired is, if you're able to, attend their board meetings or your retreats that they might have prior to when you begin your contract time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, if you have the opportunity, you sign a contract in April, if you have an opportunity to attend a board meeting or two, so you kind of understand the issues, but you also kind of get to see the dynamics of the board, what's how they work together or don't work together. And both schools I went into, I was able to go to a board meeting before I took the position when I knew I had the contract. But you learn a lot about how they work and what kinds of, how involved they want to get in certain things that maybe are not board prerogative. And one of the things is you have to be sure they understand teacher evaluations is your job, not theirs. And I inherited a school that they would have a meeting in November, and they wanted everybody to, previously they had reports. Even the athletic director would report on the coaches, and it was, they had a dinner and all that. And my first year, I just said, that's not going to happen. It's illegal. You're not to be in the board teach your records, and you're the jury eventually if we decide to make that recommendation to consider not rehiring. And so they about February, the board president brought it up, and I, hey, we're still going to do it. And I said, we're not going to do it. And we went into executive session, and because we had some parents there on another issue, we went to executive session, and I just thought, I'm probably leaving my job here because somebody wanted that, you know, and my principals were over on this side of the room and the board's over here. And because we left the board meeting room to go to just a classroom, you know, I just said, we're not going to do it. You know, it's not legal. You can't, you know, if you don't believe we're doing those evaluations, assign one person to come in and take a look at this teacher evaluation. But I said, okay. We locked down, that was it. And it turned out to be a great board, but for a while they had a different perspective on what a board could do. And so anyway, that's probably one more war story than you really didn't need to hear. But anyway, well, I think that's the, gee, we're right on an hour. I thought this would take a little longer than that. Any questions?
Just to make sure I understand, I guess. Because of all the Zoom lessons, we only have to do one interview, correct?
Right, one of those three.
Got it. Okay.
And, James, who didn't show up, he'll have to do two of them. But it's not a big deal. I do want to encourage people to be involved in the Zoom classes, and most people are very supportive. We've had great attendance. The two that weren't here tonight had good reasons to not be here. So, well, I guess James, I don't know what his reason was, but anyway. Well, I hope some of that stuff, as you start thinking, you know, somebody asked me once who my mentor was, you know, Dr. Ocean, who's at Wayne now. He was one of my first superintendency. He was at a neighboring school, and he had a lot more experience than I did. But they asked who my mentor was, and I said, you know, my mentor was some bad superintendents. I felt I learned from their mistakes, that I didn't want to do the same. And my tenure as a principal was really, I did not enjoy that at all, because the board was trying to fire the superintendent, and they just kept throwing crap at him, you know, and then he'd overreact and come back to the teachers and get on them, and it just was not a good situation. So and he just didn't handle things very well, and the board did not either. They were political, but that was 3 schools back. So anyway, I think that, any questions about your future classes or what you're taking? And you know, Joel, you're taking facility. Anybody else taking facility planning in July?
Yeah, that's in July, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I think Randy Gilson's teaching that. That works. One thing that some of you that are just kind of getting started, a recommendation that I have for finance is to take the internship at the same time you take finance. And if you really want to know about finance, you don't have to finish your internship in one semester. You can take it incomplete and carry it over to another semester. So my thoughts are, sign up with your superintendent as your mentor for the internship and follow them through his job, but following through the budget. So then you can go through the summer and see how the budget process works, and how you have to advertise it, and what a board meeting's about with your budget meeting, and those types of things. That I think when you're doing the two together at the same time, it makes good sense. And then when you do your field study, which is a proposal for a paper, I really recommend that you take class 945, which is professional readings, before you do the field study. But you want to kind of think about what you might be going to do that study on. And because you can then, with that instructor, he'll probably allow you to look, you know, if you say it's a consolidation, he'll probably allow you to do all that research. That becomes your review of literature and really saves you a ton of work. You know, it's ready to go when you do decide to do your field study. So anyway.
Is finance a fall class?
Spring.
It's in the spring. Okay.
Hey, Dr. Nelson. Sorry, go ahead, JD.
Well, I was just going to say, I've kind of a unique situation, but with Mr. Cooper being my mentor for this year, he can also be the guy that oversees my internship, correct? Like he can be my mentoring superintendent. So I can do that next spring during the same semester I take finance. I can do my internship, even though I'm not at the end of my program quite yet.
Right.
Okay.
Matt, you had a question, or was it Matt?
Yeah, with your internship, so I haven't signed up for the class yet, but they'd be working on their budget. It's one of the last classes I have to take. So could I sign up for it in July, do you know, or just talk to my
Well, you
advisor?
probably wouldn't. If you're going to do your internship with finance, then you'd probably do it in the spring semester.
Oh, so you can do it in the fall, just it'd be a different thing?
Yeah. If you did it in the fall, you'd probably do follow what the superintendent does in the fall.
Okay.
Finance isn't a big deal for you. Why? Then you can, and the internship can be carried over to another semester. It's not, an incomplete isn't a bad mark for you. It just, same thing with the field study. You can carry that over to another semester or 3 semesters.
Okay.
It took me a couple of semesters to do the field study part of it.
Yeah. I think most of them. Have you completed your field study?
I did.
What'd you do it on? Can I ask?
Mine was the effects of student involvement and performance, and academic performance.
Right. We've had a couple do that, and somebody was talking to them. Joel, is that you and I were talking about possible topics, and there's some different ideas we threw out. So, if you're not sure what you want to do, you can throw it out to your advisor and say, "Here's what do you think?" Or "Here's some ideas I have." And of course, the same's true with, I think Dr. Tehan will do the field study paper. So you might want to visit with him about what's out there. You probably. When do you finish up, Brett?
I've slowed way down, so it'll probably be a year and a half, I think, is about the track I'm on.
You've had the law, right? And
yes,
seminar,
the law and finance.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you got the tough ones behind you.
Well, that's good to know.
Dr. Nelson, I have a question about the difference really between getting your specialist and your doctorate degree, I guess, in terms of hireability and how you're viewed to, I guess, as an applicant. Could you kind of just elaborate on, I don't know, I guess, like I'm just starting out for the specialist, but is it always wise to get your doctorate afterwards? Are you more hireable, or is it more just, it kind of just gets you in the door and then the interview?
It kind of depends on your board philosophy too. Some boards really want to have that doctorate in front of the superintendent's name, and yet there's some really good schools, decent sized schools, that they don't have their doctorate. So I think it's an advantage to have it. Shows you can do it. I was working on my degree at UNL, and my advisor said, you can, instead of taking this block, a specialist block, you can take a few more hours and you can get your doctorate, right? Write a dissertation. And I said, I just want to be a superintendent. I was a superintendent, and I was on a provisional. I said, I just want to be a superintendent. I don't want a doctorate. Why would I want a doctorate? And he says, it's your go to hell degree. And I said, go to hell degree? What do you mean? He says, you never have to explain why you don't have it. I don't know. So I went ahead and did it. And then one of the things for me is that without it, I couldn't teach university classes. And that's been enjoyable for me. I think probably that road's getting close to the end, but I still enjoy working with students that are paying their own tuition. They're a little more interested than some of those undergraduate teachers, faculty, and teach undergraduates. They never come to class and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, ours are paying their own tuition, so they tend to be a little more interested. But, on what you, Gene, what you want to be aware of, or any of you, we have a dual doctoral program with UNL, and I think the deadline is March 1st. So, but basically, and Allison, you're in that, right? Are you already in that? Yeah, I think.
That is correct. Yep.
And so the first 7 classes are UNK classes. So, you know, the only thing that the advantage, if you say you did it next year, you'd still take those 7 classes and you wouldn't take facility planning. That's the one class that they don't accept for their doctoral program. But then you could go in the summer, they have their Superintendent Academy, I guess it's called, or something like that, that you could get started on that. So if you have questions about that, well, I'd probably talk to Dr. Tiana or myself. We're both on the committee with the university. So
Great. Thank you very much.
yeah. So. Okay, you've been a great group, and I've known most of you. A couple of you I didn't know before, but it's good to follow your career. Let us know if you change positions or if there's I have some superintendents that send me questions, or even principals right away when they first start their job. You always, well, how would you do this, or how would you? And it's really rewarding that after a year they're not sending you questions anymore. You know, that they've figured that stuff out. It's probably a security issue, but anyway, have a good rest of the. I guess I won't see you unless some of you will be at Administrator Days probably. Matt, you're going to Administrator Days, right? Thank you.
You know I'll be upstairs, Dr. Nelson.
Okay. Well, unless somebody has a question, why, you're free to go. Sounds like kindergarten, doesn't it?
Yeah. Dr. Nelson, thank you.
You bet. Enjoyed it.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess we're out of here.